Jumping right back into the action on today's show. Before I get to ESPN's quarterback rankings that I wanted to react to, another comment here says, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, one out if the Cowboys don't at least make it to the NFC Conference Championship game. I think it's fair, but maybe not just if they don't make it there. I think CeeDee Lamb, I can't speak too much on Micah just because I think his contract negotiation talks aren't really heating up right now. There's still some time there, but with CeeDee Lamb in particular, it almost boils down to the same thing as Brandon Ayuk. The Cowboys are taking very long to do it. Obviously, CeeDee had an amazing year for them. He's a big part of their team, but again, the circumstances that surround that team with Dak wanting probably top of the market money, CeeDee Lamb deserving top of the market money, Micah probably getting top of the market money as well, similar to the 49ers, and where the salary cap situation is with the Cowboys, they've already had to make some tough decisions. With three of their best players wanting top of the market money, something's going to have to give. I feel like one of them is going to have to leave. CeeDee Lamb is holding out right now. I don't expect him to be there at camp, so he's the one right now where I would feel like if I had to pick one to obviously leave or want to request out, it would be him, just because right now it seems a little bit icy between him and the organization. But similar to Ayuk, the negotiations are moving slow, and I think some frustration is starting to build up there based on that. But we're going to get to these quarterback rankings. We're going to get to ESPN dropping some more of their positional rankings. Yesterday, they released their top 10 quarterback rankings based on the responses and input from NFL executives, some of the coaches, and some of the scouts around the NFL as well. They've already released their running backs. I talked about them a few episodes ago. They've released the safety rankings, the offensive tackle, interior linemen, and edge rushers, and tight ends so far. A lot of them, I didn't really address them because they were pretty self-explanatory, not too controversial or anything like that, but the quarterbacks were a little interesting, so I thought I'd bring it up on today's show. And jumping right into it, going from 1 to 5 as you see on your screen, Patrick Mahomes, not too surprising, at 1. Then you have Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson at 4. Matthew Stafford there to round out the top 5. And I will move to the second half before I analyze it. 6 to 10, we have Justin Herbert, then CJ Stroud at number 7, above Aaron Rodgers at number 8, then number 9, Jared Goff, and rounding out the top 10, Dak Prescott. All but one of the 80 people that were approached by ESPN voted Patrick Mahomes at number 1. Pretty self-explanatory, no surprise there, but it was one of the comments made on Josh Allen that really riled up a lot of people in the media. One NFL executive called Josh Allen one of the more overrated players in the NFL because of turnovers, and that really got a lot of people riled up about it. But I don't know. I'm a fan of Josh Allen, but I think it has been pretty unfair with him just playing the Chiefs constantly, getting the short end of the stick most of the time on freak incidents that happened with the missed field goal and the plays at the end of the game to Tyreek Hill and getting that field goal off to send it to overtime. It's been pretty ridiculous what has happened to Josh Allen, but I see you guys commenting on this topic. Rich Diaz says, I disagree about ESPN NFL Network. 49ers are a good team, and the haters know that the 49ers are a good team. It's just the haters don't like us, but it's okay. The 49ers keep looking forward. It's hard to argue with that. You know, I think the 49ers are a great team. People like to discredit Brock, but again, I'd give him more credit than most people do around the NFL. Also, the best running back in the league, Christian McCaffrey on the 49ers, is one of the best running backs. No argument there. The best tight end, George Kittle, the best quarterback in the league, 2 on the 49ers, has number 2. Josh Allen, number 10 in a quarterback from Baltimore, number 8 on the Rams, number 12. Prescott, no way. Dak Prescott at number 10 as a top 10 quarterback. I probably wouldn't have him there. If I'm honest, just because I've wanted to fit in Jalen Hurts into these rankings. If I were to make these rankings, it's hard to argue with any of them. There are some questionable ones that just, raise my antennas a little bit. Dak Prescott being one of them. And since you mentioned it, Rick Diaz, I will start on that one. Dak Prescott at number 10. A lot of people have him higher. than I do personally, just because, he has, I think, progressively gotten better more and more over the years. I think he's been one of the reasons the Cowboys have been so successful in the regular season is because we've seen the development from Dak over the last few years. Last year, arguably, was his best year. They had one of the top records in the NFC, but it obviously comes down to the playoffs where people start to separate themselves, and Dak just hasn't done that, and that's been the biggest the biggest critique around him is just that you make it to the big dance, you make it to where all the good teams play, but then usually you just don't perform up to standard. And a lot of times it's not like the Cowboys or their defense plays bad. He has been known, or recently in these last two games, to throw some interceptions, some questionable decision making. And from that point on, it's hard to really continue to overly say that Dak is one of the top quarterbacks when he just doesn't perform to that level when the lights shine brightest. But that's my biggest critique. Some of the honorable mentions that we're going to talk about right now in regards to this list, to some that could have made it on the top 10 list, are Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Jalen Hurts, Tua, Kirk Cousins, and Trevor Lawrence were all some of the most notable honorable mentions in ESPN's list. They just missed the cut by a little bit. And now I'll get to some of the takeaways. Other than Dak Prescott being on the top 10, elsewhere on the list, seeing Matthew Stafford at number 5 surprised me a little bit, just because I felt that he was one of the more underrated guys in the NFL in terms of quarterbacks. So to see him at number 5, I just didn't think people held him to that high regard. But over the last few years, I think people have started to turn that corner a little bit more with Stafford, just based on wins and losses surrounded with the Los Angeles Rams. Just outside of arm talent as well with Matthew Stafford, he has the wins and losses to support the reason and the value that he brings to the Los Angeles Rams. Because if you look at the last 3 years, in 2021, the Rams go 12-5 and win the Super Bowl, obviously in Stafford's first year. Then in 2022, he misses 9 games, and the Rams miss the playoffs completely. They're a shadow of themselves without Matthew Stafford. And then last year, he only misses 2 games, and the Rams are back in the playoffs, and they played a good game with the Detroit Lions, but they couldn't get it done at the end of the day. But that just shows you how much he is valued, how much his presence and him just playing out there for the Rams, having him as their starting quarterback, makes that much of a difference. Similarly to Joe Burrow and the Bengals, maybe not to the level of AFC Championship games, but when he is there, this Rams team is formidably way better than they are when he's not there. They look like a completely different team. It's funny that both of them wear number 9. I'm just realizing that from the picture. But that surprised me a little bit, just how high regard that these executives, coaches, and scouts hold Matthew Stafford recently. And also elsewhere, Jared Goff in the top 10 also, again, caught me off guard a little bit. But the difference with him, from what I read in the article posted by ESPN, is that he has outplayed all the critics and all the naysayers recently around him. From the time he was traded to the Detroit Lions and everything bad that was said about him, he has really proven a lot of people wrong over the last few years to not only play better himself, but to take the Detroit Lions, this young team, and be the leader of that team and take them this past year to the NFC Championship game. I think has caught a lot of people off guard, has pleasantly surprised a lot of people. So that, in combination with just personally having great numbers himself, has earned him a spot in the top 10. A good reason why he was paid this offseason as one of the highest paid quarterbacks, because of how much he means to the Detroit Lions. So him in the top 10, I wasn't really expecting it. I feel like people are more enamored right now with the freshest, the newest quarterbacks on the block. I honestly probably expected Jordan Love to be in there over a guy like Jared Goff or Matthew Stafford, but it looks like people value Jared Goff a little bit higher than I was expecting. And just overall, if you look at the rankings from the top 5 guys on the list and then the bottom 5 guys, you really see that the biggest divider with those guys and how they're ranked is just the playoff performances. You look at Patrick Mahomes, you look at Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, even Lamar and Stafford. They've all had that big moment in the playoffs where they either win the game for their team or they're just a big contributor in getting their team over the hump. Josh Allen has been unlucky to play the Chiefs so often and come out on the wrong side of winning and losing, but he has consistently been the driving force for the Bills team. Then you look at the Bengals. When Joe Burrow is there, they've made it to AFC Championship games. When he's not there, they've missed the playoffs, so not much to be said around there. Lamar, just now turning that corner. He gets to the AFC Championship game. He falls short to Patrick Mahomes, but you can see that development in Lamar and finally having those sustained, consistent performances in the playoffs. Patrick is Patrick, Super Bowls, MVPs, Mr. Clutch, just does everything for the Chiefs, so obviously he is at number one. And even Matthew Stafford, playoff performances, going to the playoffs in his first year there with the Rams, winning the Super Bowl, I think has him there at that number 5 spot. And then you look at the bottom half of that list and how it's divided. Justin Herbert has made it only to the playoffs one time. CJ Stroud, same thing, but he's young. He's only in his second year. Rodgers as well, for how historically well he's talked about in comparison to Tom Brady, the Peyton Mannings of the world. To have him at number 8, I know the age plays a big factor in that, but also you look at that playoff record, the recent playoff performances, and it doesn't really help his case. That's why I believe he's probably so low at number 8. For how talented he is, you'd expect better performances in the playoffs, but you've just not gotten it out of him. Jared Goff has recently just, gone back on that train of playing better in the playoffs, but again, hasn't really done enough yet. He has a good window here with the Lions to, climb those rankings a little bit, but I can see him at number 9 as a fair spot. And at number 10, same thing with Dak. Some of the executives, and I'll round it off with this, actually said that because Dak needs support in big matches, he's not quite good enough to elevate his team on his own, is a main reason why he is good enough to be in the top 10 just based on his performances in the regular season. But because some executives, some coaches, some scouts believe that he can't elevate his team, he can't be the driving reason why they win a game as to why he is the last player on the top 10 rankings. And also, so one executive said that he is very good, but not quite at that elite level, like some of these other quarterbacks on that list. And it's hard to argue with it, but I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I think more has to be done maybe around him with the Cowboys if he decides to stay with them. But for what we've seen so far, Dak hasn't been able to do it himself and really step up in those moments where the team needs it. And that's unfortunate for how it's gone out with the Dallas Cowboys and him and their relationship. Maybe it's run its course. Maybe he just needs to move on and perform better elsewhere. I'd like to see that. I feel like it would be interesting, but the Cowboys and him are still working out contract negotiations. But that's pretty much everything I had to say on the ESPN Top 10 Quarterback Rankings. Pretty interesting ones, but pretty self-explanatory at the same thing. Other than Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford being ranked at number 5, I think this is a pretty fair list with how well CJ played. Justin Herbert, still very talented. I think people feel a little bit more empathy for him for what he's had to deal with coaching and team-wise. I feel like he's that good, but I think it's starting to come to a point where he needs to prove it a little bit more. But were the rankings. Leave your guys' thoughts in the chat box. If you agree with them, if you think somebody was left out that shouldn't have been, leave it in the chat box or in the comments section after this episode. But we're going to head to another quick break on the show, and when we return, we're going to talk about the Baltimore Ravens and them signing Derrick Henry, why they believe that Derrick Henry can turn back the clock and still put out great classic Derrick Henry performances, even though he is at the age of 30, an age that scares off a lot of teams, but the Ravens are very confident in Derrick Henry's abilities. I'll go more in depth on that when we return after this break.
Looking